So I am considered a child survivor of the Holocaust. What is the difference between child survivor and other survivor are the age of the person and their experience. The authentic definition of a survivor is anyone whose life was changed because of the Nazis between 1933 and 1945. So I fall into that category. I say this because my story is really quite different from other stories. What a lot of America doesn't know, and particularly American Jews who have studied the Holocaust, read about the Holocaust, is that there were many of us who tried to flee on the eve of the Holocaust. In my case, it would have been 1940-41. And my story also addresses the question that everybody always wants to know: why didn't Jews leave earlier? And so my story tells all the obstacles of trying to get out of Nazi Europe as early as 1940 and 41. My father, the late Rabbi Maurice Klein, had been taken to a Hungarian labor fascist work camp in early 1940, say the summer of 1940, and left my mother and me and my new infant brother at home. He had tried to make arrangements to leave much earlier, but my mother didn't want to go. She had her whole family in Slovakia. I was born in Košice, Slovakia. So my dad was taken to this work camp, but he managed to escape. And in that moment of when he was able to escape, he came home and told my mother that he had heard in the camp that all Jews were going to be slaughtered and murdered, and that if we didn't leave now, because we had the papers ready, that he would be caught, and that would be it. So my mother was convinced, and the most difficult thing for her in the world was to take her then 4- or 5-year-old little girl, me, and her new child, her new baby, who was only 8 or 9 months old, and decide to run. So our story is one of running, hiding in the open through 8 countries over a period of 7 months by ourselves, our destination being Lisbon, Portugal, where there were ships waiting by the Hayas, who had the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society in New York, had ships coming to Lisbon if a Jew could get out and as far as Lisbon. I mean, imagine, if you know your map, being in Slovakia and trying to get to Lisbon by a certain date to catch a ship to come to America. So my story that I tell when I speak all over the country at various Chabads and organizations is how that happened, how we did that. And I show various documents visually so people understand that story. And that is the short version.
Is there a particular episode or incident that stands out? One kind of anecdote from this period of time on the run?
Actually, I think that's a really good question, because there is one that haunts me now. So we traveled mainly by train to train from one country to the other. We had paperwork, as I say, because my father had arranged that before. But what I remember so vividly is that my mother was always holding on to one of my hands, and she was holding my baby brother in another. And my father would go real fast ahead of us, trying to quickly get to the train or to make arrangements. And one night we lost him. He went too fast. And I can still to this day hear my mother screaming, "Moritz, Moritz, where are you, where are you?" And I knew at that moment that we had lost my dad. And even now as I think about that, I get very emotional. But we found him. But that loss and that abandonment is one of the traumas that has stayed with me, as I'm sure all child survivors who had similar incidents probably feel.
In terms of family, did you lose family in the Holocaust?
Yes, one of the reasons my mother did not want to leave when my dad kept warning her before he was taken to the camp is my mom had a twin sister. And she didn't want to leave her twin sister. And when my dad escaped and came home and said, "We have to leave," she had to make that choice, that she was either going to leave with my father and take us and save us, or she would stay, and then I don't know what would have happened. We would have ultimately ended up in Auschwitz, as all Koshitsa Jews did. And I've never found my aunt, but interestingly enough, today I am in Washington at the National Jewish Retreat, and I have an appointment to meet with the researcher at the Washington Holocaust Museum this afternoon to look for some documents to see if perhaps we can find my Aunt Lily.
Was she married? Did she have children?
She did. She married, and she had 2 little girls, and I just found those pictures. Mm-hmm.
You touched upon a trauma that you remember, and your experience as a child Holocaust survivor, it also probably touches on the experience of being a child of a Holocaust survivor. At the same time, I would imagine, because your parents had their trauma of being survivors and having lost family members. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, and just as an educator, I'm sure this is something you've looked at, if you could talk about the trauma of the second generation.
Well, I think I can answer that the best way saying the quote that I end all my talks with. I did not make up this quote. I do not know who said it. But when I read it the first time many years ago, it just struck me, and it goes like this. The experience of my parents is woven through the fabric of my soul, and I am compelled to tell it. I say that at the end of my talk. I think that the experience of the parents of children, the Holocaust survivors, is woven through their soul. There isn't a second generation that I've ever met that isn't affected one way or the other. Either they don't want to have anything to do with it, as with my brother, not the one that escaped with me, but we had, my mother had another child the minute we came to America. So he's our American in the family. And he does not want to have anything to do with it. It's not that he doesn't respect it, it's that he can't deal with the pain of what his parents went through. So he refers all questions on the Holocaust to his sister, me. Then there are the second generation who are prolifically, and third generation, writing memoirs of their parents' experience today and making movies. There are more movies on the Holocaust right now being done by second and third generation than there ever has been. And then there are second generations who want to go speak in the schools. And there are second generation, I belong to the Hidden Child Survivor Second Generation Conference. We meet every year. So those are the different levels in a quick summation of how the trauma is there. There's no denying it.
I wanted to ask about the boundaries as an educator, as yourself as a survivor, as a child survivor, and as a Holocaust educator. What do you think the boundaries are in referencing the Holocaust as it pertains to maybe current events, referencing terms like never again, like concentration camp?
So I have a very unique job. I'm very blessed. I am a child survivor and a Holocaust educator for a public school district, not a Jewish school, not a Jewish school district, but Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the 4th largest school district in the United States of America. I am the only Holocaust educator in charge of curriculum and resources. And I feel that's very important. Now, we have guidelines. My main job, actually, is teacher training. There are 12 states in America that mandate the Holocaust by law. Florida is one of them. So we have guidelines in the when you work for a public school district, you have guidelines of things you can teach and cannot teach. So I have the very difficult, sensitive task of making sure that this falls under the Department of History, where I sit, where my office is, and that first and foremost we teach the accurate academic history of the Holocaust as a piece of history. But because I am a child survivor and I am a Jew, I do make sure that I include lessons to our teachers and our students of, well, the 3 main lessons that Yehuda Bauer, the famous scholar, taught me, and I teach them. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator, thou shalt not be a victim, and thou shalt not be a bystander. And I think the bystander one is the one that in the public school district and with events going on amongst the children themselves in the schools that we try very hard to push to understand. In Florida, the mandate reads teach Holocaust K through 12. I am not in approval of that. I feel that grades K through 3 and 4 are much too young to be talking specifically about the Holocaust. So what I recommend our teachers do is teach multicultural awareness, tolerance, and understanding. And then for grades 4, 5, and 6, elementary type books, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, and then getting into the ghettos and the camps and the actual happenings in grades 7, 8, 9, and then high school talk about my specialty is rescue and resistance. So again, very quickly, those are the boundaries. As far as current events go, I really leave that up to each teacher and the students to try to find not parallels, because there's nothing that can really be compared to the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust of the Jews of 1933, 1945. That's how I distinguish the Holocaust. But to find different components of things that are happening today, certainly I will tell you that when I hear the words send them back, I woke up having nightmares that week that what if I had been sent back when I was arriving here on the shores of America. Certainly when I see children separated from their parents that are immigrants, I feel that that is something that has to be, well, I don't need to compare that. I have teachers in seminars who will say, well, what about that? And then I allow them to have that discussion.